Welcome to another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, coming to you 6 days a week as we interview whitetail experts and hear their traditions and personal stories of the hunt. Learn more about the latest gear, discover proven tips, and the latest strategies so you can make your next hunt a success. Now, here's your host, Bruce Hutchin.
This is Whitetail Rendezvous Podcast, episode number 278. Welcome to another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous. This is your host, Bruce Hutchin, and we're going to visit today with Adam Keith. Adam works with Dr. Grant Woods, Matt Dye at Growing Deer TV. And every single week they put up a new show on their website at growingdeer.com. So listen up. And folks, this is an unbelievable story about how they put down a majestic buck, a buck they've been looking at, been on the hit list, got trail cameras, and it finally all came together. It's a great show and great lessons learned. So listen up. Hey, listeners, don't forget to text 33444. Food Plot for your free Food Plot ebook. Welcome to another edition of Whitetail Rendezvous. And I'm really happy to head down to the Ozark area and talk with Adam Keith today. Adam works for and with Grant Woods and Matt Dye over there at Growing Deer TV. And they do a lot of consulting. They've got a great show. So, Adam, welcome to Whitetail Rendezvous.
Hey, it's great to be here, Bruce.
Now, folks, something special happened to this young man. I can call him young man because I'm older than he is. But since I last talked to him, and it's all over Facebook, and I don't know who's got a bigger smile on him. It has to be you, but just a gorgeous, gorgeous deer. So let's jump right into the show and talk about Mr. Wonderful that you put down.
Okay, so basically to give you the whole gist of the story, family farm, just under 300 acres in Douglas County, Missouri, mostly timber country. The open ground is usually fescue pastures. It's cattle country. And so I don't hunt it a whole lot just because of work and traveling. But the way I hunt it is when it's absolutely perfect. I know there's a front just moved through, the big deer on their feet still during daylight hours, and the wind's right, and I can get into a stand and not alert any deer. I like to treat small tracts of land, small properties, as in number one thing I can offer. If I can't offer tons of acres of food and crop fields and tons of acres of native grasses for bedding, I can offer them security. So I stay out of it unless I can absolutely get in there and not alert the deer. So stayed out of it. Second time I've hunted it this year and had a nice southeast wind. Cold front just moved through, high pressure, bluebird day. Had one stand I could slip up in close to the bedding area because it was still a little warmer that day. So I got in close to the bedding area, and a 4.5-year-old buck by the name of Sticker 8 stepped out and 40-yard shot. He ran 10 yards, and the rest is history, as they say. So just a fantastic, I out of all the hunts I've been on, that's definitely up there as in the top 5 for sure.
Yeah. And his brow's 6 inches long, 7 inches?
His brows, he had one brow that was about 6 inches. The other one was about 4.5. And then, he had great G2s, 10.5 G2s, and then had about 7-8 inch G3s. Yeah.
His G2s are just really neat, folks. And when you listen to you'll be listening to the show, you can check the picture but I see a grunt call, that looks like around your neck. So did you grunt him in at all?
I did. Actually, I didn't grunt at that deer. To kind of give you a little bit more of the story. So going back to small properties, trying to find ways to increase the amount of food on the property. And I went in and hunted this area last year, noticed that there was a lot of cedar trees taking over the area, growing up 10 foot tall, and thinking about where a deer lives. They're living 0 to 4 foot off the ground level. So I need to increase the amount of cover and food at that level. So my brother, Matt Dye, and myself went in this past winter in February and cut all these cedars down and a bunch of other trees that aren't really providing much benefit to the wildlife. We cut them down. We said we want more sunlight hitting the forest floor. And instead of trying to create a food plot there, we went with the native forage approach. Instead of making a food plot of soybeans, clover, brassicas, all the other types of food plot blends, we decided to go with the native food plot, cut all the stuff, all the cedars, all the other junk trees, and just let the sunlight hit. We stayed out of that area until just this past weekend, and we went back in there, and there was all kinds of native growth, a lot of little legumes and forbs growing inside the timber. But we opened up the canopy, let the sunlight shine down, and that buck stood up. I assume he was bedded close because he was walking almost in slow motion, kind of stretching. He at one point reaches his head back and scratches his back with his antlers. And it took him, when we saw him about 80 yards away, it took him about 15 minutes to move to 40 yards, moving just really, really slow, feeding on the native vegetation that had grown up after all the cutting we had done last winter.
Now, how'd you get to set the stand set if you didn't go in there?
We hung it last year when we went in and hunted.
Oh.
Yeah.
So last year you hunted it, so I get to chronologically. So last year you hunted it, noticed some improvement opportunities, went in there last winter and improved it, left your stand right there. And then one growing season, all of a sudden, Mr. Wonderful shows up and he's munching and he's walked towards you and you shot him.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of one of those, like, you draw the plan up in your head and you're just like, well, that's the plan, but usually there's probably going to be a plan B and a plan C somewhere along. But no, he read plan A and he did it perfectly.
He followed his lines. So
yeah, exactly.
You had a very, docile, if that's right. You had a very docile deer, not nervous at all, just hanging out, and you snuck in there. How'd you sneak in there without him hearing? Because he was that close.
He was that close for sure. So it's kind of a small elevator ridge that feeds up to another big ridge that's got a big food plot on it. And we can park 200 yards away, and there's like a little cut or a little drainage ditch that goes up the side of this elevator ridge. We got down in that and just slipped up, and the stand is basically at the top of the cut, a little ditch, and we just climbed our stands that way. Wind was in our face the whole time.
Now, listeners, take a lot of notes. If you start, at the beginning, what Adam was saying, take the notes, because one, he realized we need to do some improvement, did the improvement, opened up the canopy, forbs and elder forage popped up, deer was there. His stand, he didn't do anything, never set the stand before this hunt. He one and done, and he used the topography to basically stealth into his stand, got up there, and the buck was probably the whole time, 200 yards away, 100 yards away?
Absolutely, yeah. 150. I don't think he was any farther than 150 yards away when we got in the stand.
So here you have a 4.5-year-old gorgeous, gorgeous buck that's within 150 yards. They slip in there. Did you film it?
Oh, yeah. It'll be on the show in a couple of weeks.
So they filmed it, and then they put it, and the deer just ambled up, not a worry in the world, and all of a sudden, lights go out. Wow. You can't, as you were saying, plan A, you can't script it any better. And he knew exactly what he was supposed to do.
Exactly. And I would account all that for security. And when you were looking at ways why that all unfolded, and I would account it for security. We stayed out of that area. And not only did we cut the trees down to let the natives grow and clear up the canopy and let some sunlight down, but those trees falling over, they're now laying 1 to 4 foot off the ground, which is now kind of serving as cover as well as the other stuff growing around it. So it's kind of a cover with food. So that's why he was so comfortable being in there and why he was on his feet so early in the afternoon. We've been seeing most of the movement generally in the last 30 minutes around here, especially on days with warmer temperatures. But that deer was on his feet an hour before dark.
Another lesson, guys, he didn't clean up his mess, and it wasn't a mess. They were cutting stuff down, but they just left it and let it just naturally decay, and it provided cover for the deer. So, nobody had been in there. He's all by himself. So one time sit and it's done. And the other thing that I want to talk about right now is the cold front. If you're not hunting cold fronts either before or after, you're missing out. Let's talk about that right now, Adam.
Okay, absolutely. So kind of our approach and what we do for trying to increase the security on a property. When a cold front's coming, of course, we're going to hunt right before the cold front. A lot of times that'll get the deer on their feet earlier in the afternoon or keep them moving throughout the morning. So we're hunting right before the cold front. Cold front moves through just after the cold front, but it's the periods in between the cold fronts where I think a lot of people can mess up their properties, especially smaller properties, like the family farm. If the temperatures are really warm and there's no wind, you got to think about a deer this time of year. They already have their winter coat on. So if you get the warmer temperatures, he can't take that coat off like you and I can. So he's got to figure out when he can move and still stay cool. And that's at dark usually. So staying out of those areas and not hunting those areas, those prime areas when it's not a cold front, when the conditions aren't favorable, is probably one of the biggest factors in hunting small properties as well as bigger properties like proving grounds.
So everybody, a lot of things came together, the cold front, temperatures, security, habitat improvement. And really that's what growing deer is all about and what you guys do there. Let's talk a little bit about your consulting business and how you can help other people have the same results, similar results, nothing's guaranteed, as you guys are.
Yeah. Okay. So we offer the services of consulting. Basically, people hire us to come see their property. We take a tour of it, look it over, kind of see what's in the neighborhood, food, cover, water security, and how that all mixes around, not just on that property, but in the neighborhood. And the hunting pressure, kind of figure out what their goals and objectives are, if they want to see a lot of deer, if they want to shoot 3.5-year-olds and older, or if they want to strictly focus on mature deer. We'll assist them in that, as well as laying out the appropriate food plots, stand locations, bedding areas, and overall just how to hunt their property.
Now, do you send proposals out? If somebody hears the show, how would they get in touch with you to connect and say, hey, I want you guys to take a look at my property?
They could contact us at info@growingdeer.com or just check us out at growingdeer.com.
That's simple, folks. And how far do you go? How far will you travel to see a client?
Anywhere there's whitetails, basically. We've covered from Florida to New York all the way out west where there's still whitetails.
All right, folks. So, think about it. And if you're wondering, best practices, at least have a conversation with Grant or Adam or Matt and see if they can't help you, build a balanced herd. Because as Adam and I were talking earlier in the warm up at the farm, I've been hunting for a really long time, over 50 years. One of the young kids, he's 28 now, but he's still young, took a 180 gross Pope and Young whitetail this open day. It was a Sunday opening day in Wisconsin. And, he's reported back to me, Garrett has, that they're seeing more large deer than ever before on the trail cameras. One, we have a bigger system of trail cameras, so we're seeing more deer. But the recent, mild winters, if you will, and good management, both on the deer and the ground, has increased our deer herd over the last 10 years. It hasn't been overnight. And so what are some of the things people can do to get an impact within, let's say, 5 years of more mature deer?
Well, first rule and simplest rule of the whole mix is remember that dead deer don't grow. So if your target animal is mature deer, you're going to have to stop shooting the young deer, obviously. So not shooting the young deer is objective number one. And then you've got to figure out ways to keep those younger deer on your property so your neighbors aren't shooting them if your neighbors aren't following the same goals as you. So accounting, food, cover, water, and security, keeping those on your property. That way the deer stay on your property. They have everything they need. And as long as you're not shooting them at the young age, then you're allowing them to mature so you can harvest them later.
Now, what about food plots? How important are food plots in the farm we hunt, the farm I'm talking about? We've got beans and we've got alfalfa and we got corn because they farm it and they're dairy farmers. So, part of the farm's in crops and they feed it, to the cows. So how would a person in that situation put supplemental food out there so we can attract them and keep them? Because we know once the harvest comes, there's some leftover, but the food's basically gone.
Exactly. So a lot of if we break this down in crop country versus timber country, so timber country, there's native stuff throughout the year, but when fall hits, we're dropping a lot of acorns, and so there's food basically everywhere. But if we look at crop country, like you're referring to, there's food everywhere throughout the growing season, throughout the summer and early fall. And deer have all the food they ever need. But with the modern combine, most of that food is getting harvested up, and there's not a whole lot of spilled grain like there was 30 years ago. So you can approach that all kinds of different ways, but one way you can do that is by understanding and learning more about cover crops and how important cover crops can be in farming. And so basically a cover crop is a crop you're going to plant after harvest. So that may be cereal rye, wheat, a whole blend of radishes. There's all kinds of different blends out there, but planting that after the crops are harvested, or you can aerial treat it, and so it's growing even while the crops are maturing, and even after harvest, they just continue to grow. That's one way of doing it. Or you can use the approach that I use on the family farm as I want to increase the native vegetation. And that's all about trying to get a more open canopy and letting more sunlight reach the forest floor.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of the farm, and there's some places where we could put. I'm thinking of logging roads because it has been logged, so we get super cover. But the logging roads,
yep.
Go in there and put at least some sort of grasses, or would you even think of putting some other type of forage in there on the logging roads? I would,
in shady areas, clover's probably going to do a better job than most of your like soybeans or any other crop. Clover, you're going to have great success with clover in there. And if it's a smaller area, clover takes browse pressure a lot better than a lot of the other crops out there.
Well, we've got a couple of miles of logging roads.
There you go. Yeah.
So,
I'm going to go back 1 second. And you just mentioned that the farm was logged. How long ago was it logged?
Oh, it's got to be 10 years.
Okay, but there's still a lot of open canopy probably where there's a lot of underbrush growing.
Right, and there's some places there's probably a 40-acre section you can't get in there. I'm with the briars and the vines.
Oh yeah,
yeah. It's an absolute jungle, and we know where the deer go when the pressure happens. And every year, if we just send the young kids in there and drive it, which we do.
Gotcha.
It's just you got to have what do they call it, bullnose Carhartts or something, because it just shreds your clothes. If you go regular jeans, it'll just shred them.
Gotcha. So I would account some of your large deer in your neighborhood probably to that timber harvest years ago. Yeah,
because security. Coyotes even had a hard time getting through. Not really, but they do.
Yeah. Yeah. So you not only increase the amount of cover in those woods, but you also increase the amount of native vegetation that's growing up for the deer to browse on.
Yeah, a tremendous amount of forage is there, and so the deer on the farm, they got crops all through the summer, more to eat, and then when those crops go away, then they have the natural forage, and we got water. It's a good place to hunt, and since we haven't been killing small deer, I'm looking up the picture the first year I ever hunted there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We got 5 basket bucks, really small basket bucks, and that was in 1966. And since that time, we don't shoot them anymore. If there's a kid out there who never shot a deer, you can shoot whatever you want, whatever license you got, have at it. But the rest of us, we're cutting back. So, it's interesting. And I hope listeners, just as I'm sitting here listening to Adam talk, you start thinking about your property and saying, okay, how can I change that up? Or where's that super stand that if I sit there, I always know I'm going to get a buck, but only hunt it in the perfect time, just like Adam did. He picked the perfect time, perfect wind, and everything was right. And he killed a gorgeous whitetail.
Absolutely. And, I was, while you were talking about that, another little thing that kind of goes into there is I think a lot of people run cameras close to where their tree stand location is, or to where they're putting pressure on the deer just by going to check their cameras. I actually had a camera out, and I knew that buck was in the area, but it wasn't anywhere close to that. It was about 250 yards from where that stand is, and I knew he was on the camera multiple times in the past couple of weeks, but all at night. And I had a hunch that he was bedded just on the edge of the property in a big bedding area that we we'd cleared out and cut a bunch of stuff just like I had in front of the stand. And I knew he was probably bedded there, and I knew he was spending a lot of time up in the food plot at night. So I played the hunch that he was using that elevator ridge back and forth, and it worked out.
So, there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle. You just heard that Adam used topography, figured out, well, there's a big bedding area here, but there's a transitional zone that he's going to use as his corridor that happens to have some really good food and good cover. So, just when you think about it, it's a puzzle that you pull together and you put the last piece in and you shot a wonderful, wonderful deer. Share with the people now about the proving grounds and how that's important to everything you do at Growing Deer.
Okay, so the proving grounds is the ranch that we're our home base, you might say, 2,200 acres near Branson, Missouri, and we plant food plots, do timber harvest, prescribe fire. Basically, it's where we experiment with new seed, new techniques, different techniques that we can use across the nation for habitat management. And we film there every week, make a new episode, 52 weeks out of the year, no repeats. And the Proving Grounds is kind of the place, you might say it's our laboratory. That's where we kind of pick and choose what techniques to use, which ones aren't really working that won't work for anybody else, and what techniques work for us there. It's really rough. It's the Ozark Mountains. There's a lot of rocks. And so we kind of figure that if it works there, it'll work anywhere. That's why we call it the Proving Grounds.
And so how many stands do you have set up on the Proving Grounds?
I think we're somewhere right around 50.
And so is that on, I guess it would be all over. I'm thinking food plots. I'm thinking pinch points and funnels and ridges. And how do you decide which one to hunt or to film at?
Yeah, well, I'll step back one bit and say it's 2,200 acres, but there's only 65 acres of food plots. So that kind of gives you an idea of how rough the terrain is, because we're planting every ridgetop and every inch of bottom ground that can be planted. So most of it's side slope, even though there's a lot of ridges, but a lot of side slopes. So we do a lot of bedding areas. We've cleared off, we call them glades down here, but they're basically just the side of the slope that's been, all the cedars have been cut off. There's very shallow soil, but there's a lot of native grasses and legumes growing on it. So when we're trying to pick our stand location, since there are so many elevation changes and ridges, we have to account for thermals, just like people talk about thermals out west elk hunting. Of course, we know thermals, basically in the evenings, the cold air starts to fall and starts to go into the bottoms, so it's pulling your scent into the bottoms. And then in the mornings, as the air starts to warm up, it starts climbing the ridges. So we have to account for thermals as well as wind direction and our approach and all the other things that you have to consider when you're trying to pick a stand. So trying to pick the stand at the Proving Grounds is a lot more difficult for us than when we go to Kansas. So it's like, okay, the wind's out of the west, we're going there. At the Proving Grounds, some bottlenecks can, even though it looks like a west wind sets up great, it has to be a southwest wind just because of the way the wind wraps around and blows through the ridges and the saddles.
Yeah, last time we talked, you talked about you moved one stand, was it 50 yards, 75 yards, and you had an opportunity to buck. Share that story, please.
Okay, so the stand's called 50 Acre East, and actually Matt Dye harvested a buck out of it, a mature buck, about 5 years ago out of it. But as we went back in there, we hung the set and hunted it one time before Matt killed his deer on Halloween Day. And we kept trying to hunt it the remainder of that season, and the wind kept swirling on us. And even though all the leaves were off, the wind was still swirling. And we knew it was a great area, it just wasn't the right tree. So kind of looked around. We were on the end of a big ridge, basically on the far east end of the ridge, and we were trying to figure out how we could get more consistent winds and still be in that kind of bottleneck on the eastern end of that ridge. So we decided to move the stand 75 yards up the ridge, and when we did that, we basically got more on the northeast portion of the ridge so we could see more skyline off to the north and northwest, and that told us that just seeing that, there's less chance of the wind swirling around the ridge. So with seeing more skyline, the wind was out of the northwest, more consistent on the same trail. We're only 75 yards away, but we've hunted it a lot in the past couple of years and killed a lot of deer out of there, and the wind never switches. It's always straight and consistent. Now,
do you have topo maps where you have all your stands set up, or you just use maps on your smartphone to say, okay, here's the GPS coordinate, and that's where, XYZ stand is?
We use topo maps a lot, but or a little bit, but for the most part, now that we've spent so much time on the property, we kind of know where the shelves are, and we use Google Earth probably the most out of anything, just the aerial images of the property.
So last time we talked about the core area defined, and I'd like to spend a little time on that. We got a few more minutes left in the show. So let's talk about defining the core area.
Okay. So when we're thinking about a deer's home range, there's his home range where he spends his life. And then you have his core area, and that's where he's going to spend the most amount of time. That's probably where he feels the most comfortable. The core area is where he's going to spend more time during daylight hours. And finding that core area it can be very difficult sometimes, but I guess when it comes to core area, you've got to think about a deer is going to chase a doe, a receptive doe. You may think he chased it off your property and he's completely left his home range, but they don't usually ever leave their home range because they don't know outside of their home range. So it's scary to them. So they're going to stay inside their home range, and they may chase that receptive doe out of their core area. But for the most part, they're going to spend a majority of their life in their core area. And that's where they're going to have food, cover, water, security. Everything they need. That really what will take them out of that core area is hunting pressure or receptive does.
Now, what about you're in the core area and all of a sudden a community scrape pops up? I mean, and I've seen some really big community scrapes. I mean, 100 by 10, just huge. And
yeah.
So is that where core areas or home ranges intersect, or help me understand that?
So core areas, each deer has a different home range and a different core area. But a community scrape doesn't necessarily, in my opinion, have to deal with core areas. More of a activity in that area. So where I've found community scrapes is where a lot of deer spend a lot of time. So it could be a bottleneck or a transition area, but it seems like where community scrapes are located is where a lot of deer highways, if you might say, intersect. And that's just scrapes aren't territorial, they're communication posts. So deer go to that area to kind of see who else has been in the area.
And I hope you heard, listeners, what he just said, about scrapes. It's communication. A doe pees there, and there's licking branches, everything that you know, and she leaves a scent, and then the bucks pick that up and know, oh, there's a fresh doe someplace around here, and then in the breeding mode. So how else, other than the does leaving their scent, are the scrapes used?
Basically, we look at scrapes as almost like Facebook statuses. You just kind of go in there. Hey, I'm in the area. Where are you at? Pee in it, maybe work it, and then on about their business. And the next deer comes along. Oh, okay, that's a doe's in the area. Okay, and try and pick her trail and go that way. We don't really look at them as anything outside of that.
And so community scrapes, it's just that means there's a lot of deer.
There's more deer using it on a more consistent basis.
And they just, if you ever see one, folks, it's like, holy fright, did a couple of cows get in a fight here or something?
Exactly. I actually found one a couple weeks ago in Kentucky, and when I showed it to the landowner, at the first look at it, he goes, well, we don't have hogs here. I'm like, that's not hogs, my friend. That's a community scrape.
Oh, that's funny, but a lot of people have never seen them. And once you see them, you go, holy fright. And what I've done in the past is I back trailed, I pick a direction, north, south, east, or west, and go to where that trail, first starts intersecting with the others and try to set up on the wind angles, because unfortunately the one I found, it was most of the time was at night. It was in a suburban area. I mean, there were houses 200 yards away, and cornfields and creek bottoms. I mean, it was a perfect place, but it just funneled all the deer. They had to go through here or they go through somebody's backyard.
Gotcha. Yeah, that sounds like a great place for a community scrape to be.
And that's why it was there. And over the years that I hunted there, I saw a lot of bucks. I never killed a big buck, so I didn't kill any bucks off that, but I definitely saw a lot of deer there. So wrapping up here, why don't you take a minute or two and give a shout out to whomever, and then tell people again how to get a hold of you guys at Growing Deer, and we'll call it a show.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I'll first shout out to my wonderful wife, who supports me through the whole hunting season. I'm gone a lot this time of year, and she never really complains. So shout out to her, shout out to my parents and my brother. Of course, they've supported me through my entire life and through the whole process of going in the hunting industry. And then a big shout out to Matt Dye for tagging along this past weekend and tagging Sticker 8. So shout out to all those guys. If they want to learn more or contact us, they can go to growingdeer.com, or you can check us out on Facebook at Grant Woods, or on Instagram and Twitter at Growing Deer TV.
Well, on behalf of all our thousands of listeners across North America, Adam Keith of growingdeer.com, thank you so much for sharing. We threw a lot at our folks. I hope they took notes, and folks, I can't wait till you see his deer, because there's one proud, as we say out here, one proud cowboy. I don't know what they call you in the Ozarks, but there's one proud guy. So congrats, man.
I really appreciate it, Bruce.
Hey, folks, tune in for the next episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, and you're going to hear a conversation with Robert Merle. Robert's from Kansas, and he's pro staff with Relentless Addiction Outdoors. He's going to talk about his 2016 archery harvest, a gorgeous buck that he's been watching and had on his hit list, and he's going to tell us some of the secrets of hunting not heavy timber, but pretty open country there in Kansas. So listen up.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, where you can listen and learn from the experts so you can be more successful on your next hunt. Until next time, listen, learn, and succeed.